Now, it's another story out of California, because I know that if everyone's watching this show, they were probably spending the entire week watching the DNC around the clock, so they may have missed it. But it's an important story coming out of California, and it has to do with Uber and Lyft. That's right, yeah. As the fires rage across the Golden State, Uber and Lyft have found themselves in a bit of hot water.
Hi, Tyler. A California judge has rejected Uber and Lyft's request for a longer stay of that preliminary injunction we reported on at the start of the week, the injunction that forces the ride-sharing companies to treat their drivers as employees. So that means that within just a week now, the ride-sharing companies either have to turn their drivers who are currently independent contractors into full employees with the benefits and protections that go along with that, or risk further legal actions against them.
That's right. Uber and Lyft drivers, the people you depend on to get home after you get blackout drunk at the bar, are not actually employees of Uber and Lyft. They are something called independent contractors. And that little phrase, independent contractors, is at the core of these apps' innovative strategy. Because that's the thing with these apps like Uber and Lyft. It's not that they came up with some amazing new technological innovation that disrupted the taxi industry. Their disruptive innovation comes from the fact that they basically just ignore labor laws that protect workers like me and you. And in a rare rebuke against corporate power, a Superior Court judge ordered Uber and Lyft to reclassify their drivers to regular employees so that they would be subject to regular labor laws and entitled to things like benefits. Well, Uber and Lyft were not too happy with that decision. Here's what Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi, I don't know how to say it, had to say.
So we think we comply by the laws, but if the judge and the court finds that we're not, and they don't give us a stay to get to November, then we'll have to essentially shut down Uber until November when the voters decide. It would be really unfortunate at a historical time of unemployment in California. It would put vast swaths of our drivers out of work without the opportunity to earn.
Yeah, he's saying that if a judge really did force them to reclassify their drivers, they would shut down entirely in California. And this, as he says, would be very unfortunate given that tens of thousands of people depend on these drive-share apps for their livelihood. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what is known as a capital strike. Now, we know what a labor strike is, right? It's when workers of a particular firm or an industry refuse to work, thereby shutting down production and forcing the owners to give in to their demands lest they lose out on their profits. Well, a capital strike is the exact inverse of that. Here, the owners of the firm are purposefully shutting down production to put pressure on workers and the government to give in to their demands. In this case, the right to keep their drivers in these precarious gig jobs rather than give them basic protections that every worker deserves. And the sad thing is, it worked.
Early this morning, we got the news from the company Lyft that they were going to halt operations here in the Golden State completely. But that all came to an end, about an hour ago, close to a little bit after noontime. And the reason for that, a California appeals court granted what's called an emergency stay to both Uber and to Lyft. And essentially what that does is it pauses a ruling that requires both companies to reclassify their drivers as employees by tomorrow.
Yep, at the 11th hour, a court granted an extension, leaving the fight for another day. In theory, Uber have till October 13th to come up with a plan, but really this fight is going to end up coming down to the voters of the great state of California. This November, Proposition 22, or Prop 22, is on the ballot. It basically would allow Uber and Lyft to be exempt from the law that said they need to classify their drivers as employees. Companies like Uber and Lyft have already spent $100 million to get Prop 22 passed. Meanwhile, union-backed drivers groups only have $865,000 to oppose it. So $100 million versus $865,000. And it's hard to overstate just how important this is. Technology has allowed companies to get creative in how they actually get people to provide them with labor. These new gig jobs are quickly becoming the new normal in America. There was a study that said, quote, survey research conducted by economists Lawrence Katz of Harvard University and Alan Kruger of Princeton University show that from 2005 to 2015, the proportion of American workers engaged in what they refer to as alternative work jumped from 10.7% to 15.8%. Alternative work is characterized by being temporary or unsteady, such as work as an independent contractor or through a temporary help agency. Quote, they keep going. We find that 94% of net job growth in the past decade was in the alternative work category, said Kruger, and over 60% was due to the rise of independent contractors, freelancers, and contract company workers. In other words, nearly all of the 10 million jobs created between 2005 and 2015 were not traditional 9-to-5 employment. And this is what Uber and Lyft are taking advantage of. It is central to their entire model. California's ruling represents an existential threat to them, and the investor class is actually quite open about that.
Let's bring in more reaction now. Bring in Loop Ventures founder Gene Munster, who's been listening to our dialogue. And Gene, we remind our viewers that Uber's original name was Uber Taxi. I mean, ultimately, they're talking about maybe going back to a taxi-style model if that California law stuck, at least in that state. Is that a business worth $55 billion?
No, both of these companies, Brian, are in a tight spot. And yes, there was a reprieve today. This topic is not over. Obviously, with this vote coming November 3rd and California's some of their influence that they can have on other states. And kind of you put all this together and think about if these changes to employees across the country call it a 15% increase, which is effectively their profit margins. And I want to caution the voters of California and also some of the lawmakers. Do not want to politicize any of this, but one aspect, what would the drivers want?
Yeah, that investor guy just straight up said it. If the California law comes into effect, Uber simply would cease to be a business worth $55 billion. But he did fire a warning to the voters of California. What would Uber drivers themselves want? Well, let's take a look.
They were driving around the area that I just showed you. They were driving through the loop as well, letting folks know that they want to be considered employees. So we've done our best this morning and all throughout this afternoon to speak to some of those drivers. Here's what they told us.
All we are asking and requesting is just, for them to recognize the $15 minimum wage so that we won't be a low wage more than what it is already, in the middle class.
Oh, well, we're here to protest, Uber and Lyft pulling out of California, just completely abandoning their drivers. We're out here to show that, drivers support other drivers, and that's what we're doing out here today. We're handing out PPE, and we're demonstrating that when drivers organize, we can accomplish great things.
Yeah, a study in 2018 found that the average Uber driver made about $8.55 an hour, with a majority making below minimum wage, and some even losing money after you factor in things like gas and vehicle maintenance. And this is nothing new. Back when I was at Fusion, we covered Uber a lot. And here is one report from way back in 2016.
According to Uber, more than 400,000 drivers use the app in the U.S. every month, and that's not counting their competition. But how often are we thinking about the person in the front seat? Uber drivers like Abraham.
I'm hungry, I'm sad. We make it probably $5 to $6 an hour, probably. I can be $60 billion company, don't take care of the people who are making you we make you rich, you make us homeless.
So yeah, while Uber investors and management team get rich, their drivers get paid starvation wages. Also, side note, the federal prosecutors have charged Uber's former chief security officer with covering up a massive 2016 data breach by arranging a $100,000 payoff to the hackers responsible for the attack. The personal data of 57 million Uber passengers and drivers was stolen in the hack. So yeah, Uber is no good. And the really, really crazy thing is that Uber's business model doesn't even work. I mean, they lose billions of dollars a year. Last year, they somehow managed to lose $5 billion in a single quarter. And what this means is that those cheap prices you get when you tap for an Uber on your phone are being artificially sustained by things like venture capital. Their goal is to basically undercut the existing taxi drivers, and once they push them out completely out of the picture, they'll simply raise the prices on consumers to ensure profitability, or they'll just eliminate the need for drivers altogether. So yeah, Uber sucks. But wait, there is a Democratic National Convention this week. You would think that the country's left-of-center party would have something to say about an issue that is at the heart of what it means to be a worker in this country.
There's something happening here.
Right. Well, I suppose it's not very encouraging that the President Obama's chief political advisor, David Plouffe, became a lobbyist for Uber and then got dinged with a $90,000 fine for illegal lobbying, whatever that means. So yeah, breaking news. The Democratic Party won't save us, but the voters of California could if they manage to hold the line against Uber and Lyft's assault on basic governance. And hey, at least I have to hand it to the Uber CEO for his honesty. On a recent podcast episode, he said, quote, "I do think we have the system that's optimized. It's called capitalism," Khosrow Washahi said. "It's not called laborism. It's not called socialism. It's capitalism. And it's a system that's built to maximize shareholder value and capital." And yeah, you have to admire that kind of chutzpah from the CEO of a company that loses billions of dollars a year. But the thing is, he's right. The system is called capitalism, and it is a system that is built to maximize shareholder value and capital. Maybe it's time to change that.
Nando, that was such a great segment. And, you know, what it reminds me of is how you can't regulate your way out of the tragic outcomes of a capitalistic system, right? Because regardless of what type of regulation gets passed, there's either some loophole to take advantage of, or we live in a society that has literally legalized bribery. Like, bribery is legalized. Yeah. So Uber can do what it wants. Any corporation with the means to engage in this legalized corruption can do it. And this is what we see over and over and over again. And so, and yeah, I mean, like the incredible transparency by Silicon Valley CEOs blows my mind. You know, it reminds me of the segment that I did a few weeks ago about how our data gets harvested and sold. And Google's response to the criticism was, well, I mean, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
They just say it publicly, right to your face. And what the gig economy does is, of course, it's absolutely disastrous for people who have no choice but to take these jobs in the gig economy. But for the people who are lucky enough to not have to work in the gig economy for now, you know, you feel this unbelievable amount of pressure to be grateful for your work environment, even though you're miserable. So everyone ends up miserable. Yeah. You know, if you have a normal 9-to-5 job, you're told, be grateful. Look at how terrible it is out there for these gig economy workers. And then if you're a gig economy worker, yeah, it's pretty terrible. You don't have benefits. You don't have job security. You don't have stability. And you know, in California, we're talking about one of the most expensive states to live in. So, yeah, I hope that the voters in California vote the right way. But one of the biggest issues with ballot initiatives is how unbelievably difficult it is to navigate the propaganda and the false advertising.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, and as I said, like they're spending a lot of money to get this through. I mean, this is, you know, this is do or die for them, really. I can't overstate how important it is. And it's what's in a way helpful about this story is that it's a very clear example of what I was talking about, of a capital strike, which cuts at the core of why ultimately under capitalism, no matter how, even if like, you know, you're in Swedish social democracy or whatever, you know, ultimately the power of the firms to withhold investment will paralyze the system, and that's why they will ultimately always have the last word. I mean, this is something that Bhaskar Sunkara, founder of Jacobin, talks about a lot when he talks about social democracy in his book and in his talks, is that like ultimately until you like go all the way, you know, to a different kind of system, even in a government that's sort of well-functioning and, you know, has a big, robust welfare state, the firms ultimately have the final word because they can do a capital strike. And this was just like a very clear example, a very kind of, with a clear timetable and of a company that everyone kind of knows engaging in it. So that's why I found this story to be almost helpful to understand how the system works.
Yeah, absolutely.